Welcome back to the Intentional Workplace, a podcast where we spend 15 minutes each week to talk about everything HR to improve your business. I'm Maria Williams,
And I'm Jacob Stone.
and this week we're talking about the hidden cost of avoiding hard conversations. And this is a big one. I feel like we've touched upon this topic in other episodes. And from my experience, I've seen teams really fall apart when small problems aren't addressed quickly with fast feedback. And often these really small issues can turn into really big ones quickly. And you really can get a team that's been built on trust. That trust can quickly erode and cause a lot of resentment amongst teams when hard conversations don't happen and when leaders avoid those tough conversations. So what have you seen, Jacob, based on your experience?
So, like everything else that we've talked about throughout the past few weeks, communication has, I think, been the most consistent thing that we've talked about in some way,
Yeah.
shape, or form. And I know that all of us have worked in an office setting somewhere, and the office gossip culture is something that kills businesses. It kills organization. Is the fastest thing to draw everyone down. And so a lot of that can be avoided or can change by having any kind of tough conversation. And sometimes just a normal conversation can be a tough conversation. Just quote unquote, including people in a happy hour, or hey, I'd much rather you do it this way because this is how our processes work. Or, you're representing the face of the organization or the company, and the way that you went about X, Y, and Z didn't really hit the mark with what we're trying to achieve. These are all really hard, can almost put you in an awkward position to have those types of conversations, especially as a leader. Um, and so I think it's most important to really recognize when to have those talks and to have them frequently, but within a respectful manner. It's not like you're trying to micromanage people and grill them, but just be aware of it and make sure that there's an open dialogue and open channel for people to, I don't want to say vent, but to get what they need to get out. So that way everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, I think that transparency and just open communication is key, and just that sense of um, psychological safety of making sure that team members and people in the office or remote teams feel comfortable sharing things. And I've seen, like, when tough conversations don't happen and when issues get ignored, that, like, sense of psychological safety can break down too, because people don't feel like comfortable or safe in speaking up if others aren't speaking up to address certain problems. So I think that just kind of can keep snowballing into
Right.
something bigger.
And that's something I
Um,
want to address too in this episode. And I'm really curious to get your take on it because in today's world, we are remote. And so, like I brought up with the office culture and the cesspool that that can become, how does that work with remote workers where you're not seeing each other every day? There's people that I've worked with for years who I've never actually met face to face. Sometimes I've even seen them on camera. They're just a voice at the other end of a phone. And so, how do you bridge that gap? And what's the importance of opening up that dialogue and having those tough conversations? So, I definitely want to touch on that as well.
yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think it sometimes just makes it harder, but it just means that leaders, managers of people need to be, or just, I mean, team members need to be a lot more intentional about providing that real time feedback. And it's not just, finding somebody in the hall and, having a conversation if you're in person, but it's picking up the phone and, making sure that you're carving out the time to have that conversation, which often may not seem as natural as if you're in the office, but it's still just as important. And that's just, yeah, an important part of being part of a remote team, is just carving out that time and making the effort to have those conversations.
Yeah.
Um, and something else too that I've seen as kind of sometimes a blind spot, or I've seen leaders kind of maybe not fully grasp that avoiding hard conversations and avoiding that kind of real time feedback can really shift the standards. So one example that I have was I was part of a team and on these weekly meetings, and one person would pretty consistently show up late to the meeting, and it wasn't a meeting that I was driving, but somebody else was, but nobody said anything, and the leader at that point never really acknowledged it. And then over time, like, others started showing up late too, and it sort of kind of kept and it became a bigger problem, and that leader came to me and asked for some help of, like, "How do I address this?" And that was a piece of feedback that I gave, is like, that isn't, if you're avoiding confronting that issue when it happens the first time, then it can lead to this, and then it can lead to, people kind of thinking, "Oh, well, this person doesn't care. It's fine if I'm late," or this person didn't give, um, you know, feedback on something that was obviously wrong. That means that, okay, maybe I'm held to, I don't need to be held to that same standard. So that's just another thing that I've seen happen as a result of not addressing something quickly, is it can often just, like I said, keep kind of snowballing and turn into something a lot bigger that's much harder and a little more awkward to kind of go back and address after the fact.
Yeah, we don't wanna have these things morph into a big, hairy, green monster that we can't
Yep,
then slay down the road, right?
that's right.
Um, and, I know it's important, um, opening up dialogue to establish the culture, and I've always advised business leaders or my clients that, again, conversation is key. Even if you don't like the conversation, even if you don't like the answer to which you're gonna be the question that you're gonna be asking, it's important to get everyone on the same page. But even more so, having the tough conversations about when you're building something and you're moving something forward and you're trying to build whatever people operations or systems in place, a lot of times, whether you're in a partnership or even just management in general, can a lot of times not be on the same page. They want different things. Maybe the goal is the same, but the path to get to that goal could be different. And those can be very tough conversations because now you have, in some cases, millions of dollars at stake that you're trying to push through. So I guess what in your experience, what are some of the consequences of avoiding those types of conversations for business leaders, for management, and how do you overcome those?
Yeah, I mean, consequences can be huge. Like, if it involves somebody like a, head of finance or something, and you're talking about numbers, and if this person isn't kind of carrying their weight or has made mistakes on, report outs of business reviews and things like that, like, if that's not if that's not addressed immediately, I mean, that can hurt the bottom line and impact, financials of a company. So I think consequences can be both on the business kind of financial, like, side of things, but also just the overall, if you have a team that starts, the standards start lowering, people feel more a sense of kind of resentment versus trust. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it a bunch, that type of feeling is contagious
Yeah.
in a work environment. I mean, even a remote work environment. If there's one person that feels, that they are being treated unfairly, or that, something's not being addressed, and what kind of place is this to work if they're not addressing this, and starts talking about it, I mean, that's contagious, and
They
that
can
can
burn that place down to the ground in a heartbeat.
totally. Yeah, exactly.
One
So
of the things that I am a big proponent for it, and I'm gonna plug us right here, ready? Always look at bringing in a consultant for tough conversations. It's
mhm,
nice to have a third party that has literally no dog in the fight, that
yes.
now they can just help guide that conversation. They can help facilitate certain, aspects of the business that because we tend to be too close to, and we have those blind spots like you were mentioning, that now they take a step back and they go, "Wait a minute. Let's address this issue first." And a lot of that can come down to having I don't wanna say a disgruntled employee, that makes it sound like you're in a bad 1980s flick, right? But, like, when you have that toxic person that starts breeding that negativity, it's easy to get caught up in that. When you bring in a consultant, whether it be for HR, finance, whatever that is, to help you facilitate these conversations, especially the really tough ones that no one wants to have,
Yeah.
that can save you thousands, millions of dollars down the road and really help you scale intentionally.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, sometimes you're just too in it, and it's that bringing in somebody else, an outsider point of view, can help you find your blind spots, and yeah, and help talk you through what you need to do. So totally agree. And the another just kind of point here is for leaders that are, in a position where, they need to provide, or everybody should be providing feedback all the time. But preparing for a tough conversation, some key pointers that I have too are really focus on the action and not the personality.
Ooh, I
So
like
this
that.
is kind of a big one is, instead if somebody is showing up late consistently to meeting, instead of saying, you're unprofessional, be very specific. In the last two meetings, you showed up 5 minutes late, you interrupted, what was happening. The impact of that is XYZ, and be just specific on the observations and the actions rather than calling out somebody's kind of personality, or diving into something personal. I think that's always a great way to frame a tough conversation, and do it. We mentioned this before, but like do it early, do it real time if possible.
Yeah.
And because the longer you wait, the bigger it gets.
The bigger it festers, and then it's
That's
just
right.
the big elephant in the room, and it's definitely hard to address.
Yeah.
Spot on, spot on. Um, and so really quick, how can leaders address these issues earlier then without damaging that morale? So I know that you just mentioned this, but dive a little deeper into what they can do specifically, the way that they might approach it, so that way they don't kill the vibe completely and just off put everybody.
Yeah, I think being specific is definitely one. I think if they're able to kind of anchor around company kind of values or behaviors, I think that's always helpful to have something to compare to. So, at this company, we talk a lot about, accountability, and I want to make sure that what we're doing here, we're all holding each other accountable, and because of that, this is what I want to share with you today, and kind of anchoring to those types of shared values, shared standards, I think is always important. Being specific and giving very specific examples, and do it real time. And always kind of assume positive intent too, and kind of go into the conversation
Right.
curious of like, what's going on here? Or, I've noticed, this, like, do you want to talk about something? I think that's always, instead of going in kind of you know, in a more of an aggressive way, will lead to more defensive kind of conversation, I think.
Yeah, and
So
intention is huge for sure.
yeah, yeah,
Um, okay.
yeah,
Well,
yep.
that'll be it for this week. Next week, I think we
Great.
talk about me and not for thee. So the management double standards, which I think piggybacks off of this perfectly. So tune in next week, anywhere where you get your podcasts, and we will see you next time.
Alrighty. See you next time. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.